Greetings. In this presentation, I'm going to share with you some photographs that I took of a job site that I was fortunate to work on as a carpenter. I was on the job site for over 2 years. The project was understaffed at times, so it took longer than it should have. There were some issues. It was kind of a design build as you go project, and it wasn't managed very well. Besides that issue, though, it was an incredible building. It was in the western part of North Carolina, not too far from the Tennessee border. The homeowner was very wealthy and owned the entire top of a mountain. So we drove about 3 miles from the base of the mountain up to the very tippy top of it. Worked in all sorts of weather up there. It was a wild job site in a good way. It was fun. It was very interesting. It was the first time I started working around architects, and that's kind of what got me interested, especially interested. I had thought about it previous when I was younger, but working around architects at this point was what got me back to graduate school. So I spent over 2 years on this project, and then I headed up to Virginia Tech for graduate school. But anyway, we're going to move on now and tell you a little bit about this. I think it's a great opportunity. The photographs are very good and very clear, and the next best thing to being on a job site, I think, is looking at quality photographs and discussing them. So here I just brought up paint. I don't have any actual architectural documentation for this project, so I just wanted to share with you the layout of it. So this is the house here, these 3 volumes. This is the main portion of the house. This is the great room that comes off the front. That's what that photograph was of, that we were just looking at, the great room on the front. And then back here's the master bedroom, and they're connected by these kinds of bridges. And so the road up the mountain approaches from here, actually. You come up the mountain and you see the great room. That's your first impression of the building. And then you take the driveway back here to a parking court, and the entrance was over here, actually. So you got to see the nice face of the house on the approach, but then to enter, you actually entered from the back over here. So again, that's the main house, the great hall, and the master bedroom back here. Back here was a garage. This was built into the ridge of the mountain. The highest point of the mountain was over here. So we built the structures from the back of the job site to the front because of the logistics. So we put in the garage first, and then this was a woodworking shed, and then there's a big retaining wall right over here, and it drops off significantly on this portion. So we put in the garage first, the retaining wall first, the garage, followed by the woodworking shed. Then we put in the master bedroom and worked our way up through the main body of the house up to the great hall. Okay, so let's get rid of that, and let's take a look and see what we see. So here we are. This is the main body of the house going in. So I have my back to the garage at this point. Down here, this would be the approach, and then you swing around the side of the house, and you'd park in the back right here. This would become the main entrance to the house here. So this is the long axis of the main structure. So this is obviously concrete forms going up, large pump trucks, sending them to some tall, the gable end walls. The sides of a building would be, I'd call these the gable end walls over here. And that's about all we see happening there. We see some stonework started on the retaining wall on the side. Now this is the approach. So now we're facing the job site. That's the garage in the back. That's the woodworking shop on the left. And then the ridge of the mountain would be back here where these trees are. So we can see the poured concrete here, stonework coming up. I believe this was block on top of the wall, I suppose. Probably to save money, that's my guess is what that is. And then pouring going on beyond. So here we are pouring. So this looks like this might have been completed already. This might not be part of this pour. I'm not sure. No, it probably is. Yeah, it probably is part of this pour. This is the master bedroom in the back corner. So you see the formwork, braces put in for the formwork, and these braces as well, all to keep these forms from moving when the pressure of the concrete rises. And there's the finished foundation, the beautiful view of the mountains. So here we are in the back. This is the master bedroom. Here are piers, concrete piers, parts of the foundation, so beams will be laid across in this direction, and the beams will help carry them. Then we see the main portion of the foundation, and then up here you could see the formwork for the great hall that's getting poured. That's the final pour. And now the timber framing begins. So here we are in the master bedroom in the back of the job site. This is recycled Douglas fir. So there were two woods. One was Doug fir, and the other, I think it was a red maple, but I'm not actually 100% sure. That was the owner procured the maple or whatever wood it was. A hurricane had hit in the previous years. This is the late 90s, and a lot of trees had come down, and he collected the trees that came down. So that was the main portion of the house. But then back here at the master bedroom and one other part where I'll show you, this was recycled Doug fir. It was in an old mill building, and it was kept underwater at a lake for decades. So in order for there to be fungus and mold on wood, for there to be rot, it requires air. So underwater, there's obviously no air, so the wood was actually preserved down there. So we will see notch holes and drilled holes that belong to its former life as a mill building. Okay, so here in this picture, so this is a bent. The first bent went up that consists of this column beyond, this girt connecting the two, the rafters, and these braces, and here's the post within the truss. So that makes one girt, and you can see then girt number 2 is up here, and then here's girt 3 lying to be put up next, girt 4 to follow. You can see we hung them off with a large oversized sawhorse. We hung them off the room and calculated how much space we would have to raise these things. So the first one goes up in place, then we put in temporary bracing, some 2-bys. We put in this piece, which also has this piece bracing it, so this is a connector. You can see one beyond, so the connector would be hanging there kind of in space, waiting for this girt to arrive. So it was lying here, the crane lifted it, this fellow is climbing and placing it, and he's the one who's going to go up and release it, and he's also, with his hand, that's the sign for lower. So he's telling the crane operator to lower it. We have cutouts in the floor for where these things should be set. So that is what he is helping to manage and communicate to the crane operator, and then we would be at each column base helping as well to kind of steer it into its home. All right, and there it is, the finished product. So 2 cross gables. This will be the sleeping area, and back here the master bathroom and closet. And then a fir is put up in out of respect for the trees that have given themselves to this frame. You put up a bough of a young tree, and that is what we see there. Okay, and then we're on to the exposed ceiling. So the ceiling comes first. This is all tongue and groove, and this has to happen quickly because we want to quickly wrap the frame in the structurally insulated panels, the SIPS panels. So first the ceiling has to go on. And if there were chandeliers, we would have located any cutouts that needed to be made for those, and even put some wires, run wires across the roof, because the insulated panels would be covering them soon. So that had to be done quickly as well. So the tongue and groove roof is in place, and now the SIPS panels are arriving. So first the ones enclosing the walls go into place. The gable ends go into place, and now the roof panels are being flown, and the carpenters on the ground would put the toe boards on them at specific intervals so that the carpenters could easily climb and continue to grow. So that's, you see toe boards here. This is the finished ceiling, which we don't want to have exposed to the weather for too long, so that should be covered. There should be tar paper on this. Actually, here we see some tar paper. I'm surprised we don't see it there. I would expect tar paper below, but I think this panel is going to be arriving here, so it's actually the reason why there might not be tar paper right here, and this should be complete. The reason why there might not be tar paper in this specific area is because when this gable gets extended and framed in, that's actually going to be like an interior space. But in general, I would expect to see tar paper finished. Okay, moving on. So now some concrete work. We're up in the front. So the Great Hall has a circular, an apse, 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 I believe it would be called. ASP, A-S-P-E, A-S-P-E, I believe it is. The circular part here in the front. And so we see the concrete pours going up. So they did one pour, brought it up to about 6 feet or so. Now they're moving the forms up, and the rebar was in place from the bottom. But they'll be doing it in several pours, several lifts. That's what we see there. So now they're tying in the rebar. All right. This is just a massive footing. So this is at the edge, an interior, not. It's a wall that belongs to in the Great Hall, essentially. It's where the Great Hall meets the main building. So a massive, massive footing. And here we are working on the rebar. So this fellow has a blowtorch, and he is cutting out windows at this point. So all this has to get tied together, and the verticals have to be put in there. So they would get up to this portion right here, and where they begin the gable, then they would put up a pole, a single pole right in the middle, calculate how high it needed to be, and then they would run string to show them exactly the size of the gable. So all that would be kind of laid out in the air while they were climbing. And again, we see multiple pours happening. And I am on the roof of the master bedroom at this point, looking down at the same thing happening. Right there, you can see the string right there. So at this point now, they're going to start cutting the pieces to fit within the gable. And then we see the rebar and the insulation down here for the floor that's going to get poured soon. I believe these are two like mechanical rooms here. So this is the main area running in this direction, and then this is the little bridge that connects it to the Great Hall beyond. And here we see the formwork in the snow and showing all the cables that are used. Cables are come-alongs, you call them. They have cranks on them, so they could pull things into place, timbers, or these walls that need to be plumb, that is standing straight up and down, not leaning in any direction. So all these come-alongs would be holding it and pulling it into place so that it stood plumb. That's the master bedroom beyond. And it was cold. We worked in single digits at times up on the mountain. And there were a lot of beautiful days too, and a lot of rain, actual clouds like in the clouds, literally. So now they're stripping the forms. So they completed the gable, and the forms are coming down. And this is where the deck will be. Formwork coming down. So here he's taking out the they're taking out the wooden boxes, the window boxes. And down at ground level, the floor is coming in, so this is hydroponic heating. So it ran, it's escaping me right now, the actual liquid that goes down, essentially. But there were, I think, about 3 pits, each with about 50 copper lines that went down. I forget, it was at least 100 feet, perhaps more. And basically the substance, the liquid, whatever it is, which is escaping me, would basically go down and grab the heat that's down there and bring it back up. So it's geothermal, so it's not actually producing a lot of heat. It's actually going to grab heat from the earth. And then that's used to warm the water. There's probably just water in these tubes, actually, that run throughout the floor. So this is a hydroponic floor heating system. So that's what we see there, with the rebar below it, with the plastic below that. And that same view, now we are putting the timbers into place. So this is the recycled Doug fir. So these black circles here, that would be bolt holes from its former life. So we would, this is the crane. You could see here these 2 straps flying in this floor beam, and they would bring that over. Carpenters on the ground would hold 2 columns in place, then they would drop the beam in place, and then we would drop in 2 of the floor joists, and then it would be stable enough, and then the crane could release and move on to the next one. So the crane stayed for the columns and the beams and two of the shorter beams here, but then we placed all the other beams by carrying them up ladders. Very, very heavy, backbreaking stuff there, and fighting with them to get them into these cuts. So there'd be a lot of hammering and taking it out perhaps, and then coming back in with chisels and planes and making more room if they were too tight, too snug. Typically, though, everything is fitted up in the shop where it's cut, so it's all been fit up once, but you know, wood's a natural, imperfect product, so it's doesn't always go so smoothly. All right, moving on. So now we're up onto the second level, and the crane is carrying this bent over. So these are the bents where I am standing, ready to be raised one by one. So there was no room over there, so we did it here. So figuring that out again, logistics. This is a opening that's going to go down to the first floor. It's going to be called like a very large lantern tower. It's going to be right here. This is the main entrance to the right. So we're looking through the main long direction, the body of the house. So the entry, you would come in here, you'd be greeted by this magnificent lantern tower, and then around it you could enter the Great Hall. So this is kind of like a common area is what this would become. And all of this concrete will be faced with stone. So the bent was lifted by the crane. These fellows are just carrying it over or just kind of guiding it over. Then they would turn it and put it in place here. You can see right here in the distance the connector girt and the temporary 2x wood that is holding that up. And then it'll join this girt, and then that'll be in place, stable. And here we get the different view of the same. So this was the first girt that was in. This was the connecting piece that was waiting for the second girt to arrive, and so on and so on. Third bent, next connecting girt, the final bent. And now these are the purlins that are being dropped into place, so we would call that a purlin ladder. So the first one gets put into place right here, exactly where he's standing. So this is the first purlin in this bay. I would call this a bent, and I'd call this a bent, and in between it forms a bay, is what you call it architecturally. So the first purlin will drop right here. That's where the column meets the rafter. So it's that bottom plate there, and then the cords could be dropped, and then the second purlin would be dropped in at the second location, and so on up to the ridge. Okay, and now we're on to the lantern tower. So whatever wood this was, this main portion that's escaping me, basically you couldn't find, I think these were 32-foot columns. You couldn't find them thick enough and straight enough in that species, so they had to go with, I think, the Doug fir here. I think it was Doug fir or oak, but they had to make an exception to the rule because that species, they just couldn't get it. So the crane is bringing in, they might have brought this whole piece. I can't exactly tell. I think the columns were put in one by one. I really can't tell from the puzzle that I'm seeing here. I think the columns were all set in place, and this fellow with the very large hammers pushing this brace, I'll call this a brace, this diagonal bracing, forcing it into that pocket right there. I don't recall the sequencing of how this exactly happened. I'd kind of imagine columns in place and then bracing to follow, but I can't exactly recall. All right, moving on. Here we are, just same place. So this is showing us. Okay, so this happened previous. This slide should have been preceded the former one. So I guess we put them in pairs. It looks like it's all strapped together. So the bracing was probably put in down on the ground, and then it appears like maybe additional 2x was put in here, just clamped in, so that when these things are lifted, they don't stress. So we would put additional 2x6s across things so they don't flex and get damaged while being lifted. An important consideration. So he is on top. He is holding a microphone that is taught and giving the crane operator directions, a walkie-talkie. And then down here, we're prepping the next pieces to get flown. We call them flying rafters or flying pieces. When the crane lifts it, it's called flying. And so now we've completed the lantern in the middle, and now this is where the next roof, the next series of roofs will connect. So again, he's speaking in the microphone and guiding the crane operator. And this is again that wood that I was talking about. So this would be like a 2x6 or 2x8, just laying across them, and then 1, 2, 3 big heavy-duty clamps to keep these pieces in line and not flexing and getting damaged. And you can see the come-alongs, all these yellow bands. That's again for forcing these things together, pulling tighter and tighter and making sure everything is standing plumb. Inside the lantern tower, so looking up into the tower, putting down the tongue-and-groove ceiling that we need to install before we put in the SIPS panels, the exterior sheathing. So this is the crown on the lantern tower. This thing is probably about 8 feet square at least, I would say. Maybe bigger, could have been 10 feet square. So again, assembled on the ground, all the ratchet straps holding parts together, and getting flown up in one piece sitting here. So we finished the tongue-and-groove ceiling. This is all of the SIPS panels that have been put on, and then SIPS panels standing tall, and then this will come and sit on the timbers, which are what these gentlemen would be sitting on. Just another image. I like this image, just kind of showing the kind of a complicated maze of structures. So some very big cracks running through them, but you know, deemed nothing to worry about by the engineers. And then all the pegs we get driven in. That's what he's doing right there. And then when they were done, when the frame was all done, we would spend days climbing the entire frame, and all these would have to be cut down to like a 3/4 inch reveal, you would call it. So each piece would just have a 3/4 inch piece coming out. And we would use nice Japanese saws, and we would have like a plywood spacer, essentially, a piece of plywood that was 3/4 of an inch thick, and it would have a circle cut in it that was bigger than this, so we would just put that on top of it as a spacer and then cut with the saw against it, against that spacer. And that's how we would get them all quickly. But there are many pegs, so it's quite a chore. So again, I like this image. It shows nicely how over here the king post is standing tall, and over here it's at a clear angle. So this is just an example of how things would, in particular, move and twist. So this would take quite a bit of fighting. This piece here, this tenon would be dropped into that mortise and then secured there, and then we would have to fight and twist this one using the clamps in particular, kind of as levers. It would get we would try to push or have the crane pull it in that direction after it started. All right, getting ready for the Great Hall now. So as site carpenters, we did all the carpentry, helping with the frame and preparing for concrete, or doing concrete formwork, special stair formwork. So right now we're prepping the sill plates that are going to sit on this concrete. You can see right there. So we would have to, through pulling strings and measuring, we would want to have a level sill plates for the timbers to be placed on. So we would have to run plumb lines and know the heights of all of these concrete piers. You know, he's coming out there. We've cut a piece of wood to the thickness to get it all of the sills to the right height, and he's installing that right now. And then, so now we have those heights out here, and at the walls we put shims in wherever a timber beam is going to sit. We would put a shim or a plate for it to sit on. And now that all the exterior walls are at the correct heights, now we run strings across throughout the building, and now, so that's what that is right there, a string and another string, and then we locate that is where the column is going to land. So he's holding a plumb bob. You can see the string faintly coming down, and that's the plumb bob that he's steadying, and it's telling him the exact corner of where that timber is going to land and live. Typically with steel columns, we'll place them according to their center lines, but trees, again being natural imperfect products, we would place them according to the squarest corner. So when the timber wrights in the shop were deciding how to cut the column, they would put all of the squarest corners, say bottom left side, for all the columns in the house. Excuse me. So if you were looking at a plan of the column grid, we would have our square columns, and then the bottom left would always be the squarest corner of that timber, and that is how we would locate them when we were laying out where the grids were going to be arriving exactly. You don't just let them land. You decide where they go, and they'd be doweled in. Something would be keeping them there. They don't just sit wherever they decide to land. So that's what's happening there. And moving on, so here they come. So we have the bent along the back wall, columns, braces. Here you could see the beam that's going to accept this second beam. This maybe a floor joist, call that the floor joist, call this the beam. So the joist is waiting here with this temporary support below them, and then the second bent will arrive, and this tenon will be seated into that mortise, and then it will be complete. Then the crane operator it'll be released by the crane. Okay, and now we're at the front of the Great Hall. So this is the apse, and we are looking up. So this is what will become the ceiling. And now we're on the roof of the main structure, looking down at that area. So this is the ceiling of the first floor room that's underneath the Great Hall, and the Great Hall is going to sit on top of it. And now we are installing the SIPS panels at this point. So we have meat hooks that get driven into them down on the ground, and they get pulled out and released. So that's what the crane is holding. These are the toe boards that were put on by the carpenters on the ground, and these are spacers right here. So this would be a 3/4 inch piece of plywood, so that all of these panels are exactly 3/4 of an inch away from each other, and we would do the same on this seam here. And then we would nail them with very long nails. If these were roof panels, I'm thinking at least 6, if not more, 8 inches perhaps. I don't recall exactly the thickness of them, but very long 10-inch nails or so going into the purlins below. And then we would come back with insulating, with cans of foam spray, foam insulation, and we would fill in all of these spaces that we created. And we kept them to 3/4 of an inch because the nozzle of the gun that has the insulation in it was 1/2 of an inch, for instance. All right, now we are ready for the Great Hall. We calculated that these 3 bents, there's enough room for them to be hanging off here and enough room for them to be stood up there. And then the additional bents would have to be fabricated on the ground down here. So the first 3 are up on the deck, and the rest will be down here. We want to get as many up there where it's nice and perfectly flat and easy to work, and but you could only get so many before you run out of space. And so the others had to be done down below. So that's the roof that the other picture was taken from. All right, and now here's a glorious picture of the beautiful bent coming in. So this bent, this rafter and column, all that was put into place and is now secure, tied back there, tied back there, tied back there, secure at the column base. And now the crane has brought in this connector, and it's flown into place, seated right there, pegged. He's pegging the bottom of the brace right there, and then he's out on the connector pegging it right here, and then it will just float and wait for the next bent to arrive. And the next bent coming up, and these are called hammer beams again. This is all for lateral support, keep it from not racking in this direction. And the purlins going up, so some exterior timber frame, but that's not the same timber frame. This the interior timber frame is wrapped completely in these SIPS panels. Any timber frames on the outside are exterior frames. There's a complete envelope of insulation with these panels. And then you can see the pressure treated coming in here for accepting the windows. Beautiful ceiling in the Great Hall, and you can see all of the pegs that need to be cut on both sides, every one. Alright, now taking a closer look at the SIPS panels. So, kind of a miserable job cutting these things, can't see anything, foam's going everywhere. So these are put together with splices. We'll see some images, and I think we'll saw some details. So the two will be adjacent to each other, and a wooden splice would come into the channel and connect them. So we just use these splices. We would measure, this is where the cut needs to be, and then we would measure over a certain distance, and then we would put this splice there just temporarily, using it as a saw guide, and then we would screw it in place at a couple locations. So it is not, when you're typically cutting plywood or a 2x dimensional lumber, you're looking at a pencil line, and it's easy enough because you could see. Here it's impossible to see anything really, and the blade is just completely buried in there. So you use a guide. Long story short, here's a drill, and this is a heat knife for cutting foam out of the exposed edges where blocking needs to be put in. That's the woodshed beyond. All right, cutting again, so a big inline, like a, what do we call it, like a tree saw. Chainsaw. A chainsaw. It was escaping me. So it's like a chainsaw that comes on a base, like a circular saw. So it's like an inline saw. So cutting the edge. All right, now they're coming up. The SIPS panels are arriving, and now you can see all the furring strips on the back side of the timbers, so that these SIPS panels are kept a ½ inch off of the timbers. And this is where the apse is coming. So I think we just completely covered the wall and then cut out an opening into the final portion. Moving on, nailing off the panels. Such a massive house it was. Just every chore just took a long time. So moving the ladder around and nailing all of these off again. If they were 6-inch. I think they were definitely 6-inch wall panels. So that would be an 8-inch nail being driven into them. So the first 6 inches were easy. You put the big nail, the spike you'd call it, through the first layer of OSB, and then you'd have about 5 inches of foam. The nail would go right through that. Then you get to the back side of the OSB, go through that easily enough, and then you'd hit the column or the girt, the actual timber that it's getting nailed to, and that was hard nailing because that's all very hard wood. All right, the roof going up, roof panels going up. You see the guide just here guiding it, especially on windy days. And this was also one of the hardest jobs. So you could see you're going up, and right here is where we would have our fascia, which holds the gutter. And it needs a sub-fascia. So this would be the sub-fascia. So as it is here, that's just exposed foam. And then we would put in the sub-fascia. And each side would be cut with an angle corresponding to the pitch of the roof. And getting this board, the face of this board, to be exactly however many inches off the face of this wall, so that if you were standing down on the ground and looking along it, you'd want it to be straight and you'd want it to run parallel off of this wall. If it's 16-inch overhang, then this line right here should be 16 inches off that wall consistently. And that was a chore, getting that to be accomplished. Even though they cut out the foam on the ground before these things came into being, and even though we tried hard to land all of these things perfectly adjacent to each other, with chalk lines above that we could follow, getting this thing in the correct dimension off and getting this thing plumb itself was a real chore. So we got that in, and then Sawzall would cut off the remaining little bit of the OSB that came off. All right. Continuing to work on the panel, so we have laid out, we're at the very top of the building here, and we have laid out with chalk lines where the windows will be, and now we're cutting them out with chainsaws. There we go. Here we could see the panel in cross section, and these are areas where the splices would be. So the splice wouldn't have been put in at this point, or if it was put in, the top piece at this point would just fall out. I forget which. It might have been put in place, but then we would basically have to cut that splice and put it back in there, and then the splice extends from this panel to this panel. It runs right here, and then we would screw the splices in. So a lot of drywall screws, essentially, just to put all the splices to kind of stitch all these panels back together. And then we would also have to cut out the foam at this location and put 2x4s in. I believe if these were 6-inch panels, it was probably a 2x6, so there's probably 5.5 inches. That's my guess. So we would put 2x6s in, and that would be for nailing the windows and doors. So even though the process of wrapping the frame in these SIPS panels was very quick, for for big portions of the house, the crane would be there to help us. We would enclose it very quickly, but this work was very time consuming to follow. Much easier to do if you're using 2x4s and stud framing. So this was a chore. All right, the very front of the house, the apse there, that was very tall. That was a good 60 feet up, I think, and very complicated. This is all faceted, so cutting these SIPS panels to have this faceted roof work was very, very complicated. All right, so now we have some custom rafters, trusses. It's going to be part of a truss, some homemade trusses, essentially. So we cut them on this nice angle. A simple circular saw could actually cut on an angle like that. And now he is gang sanding them. So this is the portion that he wants. So we have clamped them together, and now he is sanding them all at the same time, so they are exactly the same. And we're inside the main portion of the house at this point. That's the lantern tower beyond, and now we're starting to put in some interior partitions. And here are the nice roof trusses. So homemade roof trusses, essentially. So you can see plywood being nailed. So this would be the bottom cord, top cord, plywood being nailed there. And that's that roof right there we're constructing. So now the house was so big that we kind of continued to work on it in stages. So windows starting at the back of the house, and roofers arriving now. This is a gorgeous terracotta roof going on. This is the kitchen portion, so the garage is to my right here. That's the front of the house. I'm off in the far field. So this is around the kitchen area. So again, this is all just pretend. This is a real timber frame, obviously supporting this little bit of roof, but everything else is just half timbering. Not really structural. Some round posts that were incorporated, very nice. Nice stonework arriving. This is a heavy-duty deck off the kitchen we're constructing. And you can see the windows were put in, and now some more half timbering surrounding those. Here's the deck. So some heavy-duty angle brackets. So these would be our cantilevered beams with angle iron. Mounting them back to the concrete. This would be at the concrete, which has been covered with a black, like a damp proofing material, and then after that damp proofing comes the stonework. Insulation, actually an insulation board here to protect that. So it's concrete, this damp proofing, insulation, followed by the stone. And the stone will bury these angle irons back there. The gorgeous front deck is massive. You can see here, now filling in here, this is I think like a stucco material, I believe. This is a slate roof with the, I think we'll get a better view with the snow guards. Large sheets of snow are prone to just falling off of slate roofs, very dangerous, so you put snow guards down at the bottom. There we are, the snow guards there. So this is the Great Hall. There's the deck coming. Stonework going on the front, on the inside and the outside. So this wall here, probably an 8-inch concrete wall with 8 inches of stone on each side, so probably about a 2-foot thick wall here. Stonework being built around the downspouts. The downspouts, which are probably 6-inch round PVC, being embedded in the columns. Beautiful stonework from the area in North Carolina. Here we are up on the roof. Slate going in. Snow guards there. And just working from the bottom to the top, just like fish scales. Some finishes, so kind of in the spirit of, of century-old timber frames, but these are just tiles. These are probably a 1/2 inch thick, these red stones, so nice herringbone brick pattern, but they're not real bricks, they're just tiles. Over here, nice architectural detail up in the gable end. This is the entry, so there's going to be a round open air gazebo air part there, and then this is like coat rooms essentially. So this was our attempt at cutting a crook, which from our earlier lecture I described a little bit of what a crook is, when you get a tree and you split it down the end, and then it goes up here in the gable end, and it is like a Rorschach image or a mirror image, you call it. So you'd have one going this way and the other going that way, and they were structural back in the day in the original timber frames, and very, very sophisticated carpentry to do this. So we found a tree on site that had a crook in it, and but we cut it in half, and lo and behold, it was rotted. So that did not work, and so we ended up with a detail like this, and not a crook. And some more nice half timbering, beautiful copper roof. This is the beautiful terracotta roof, and then the blue dark gray slate roofs on the main house and on the garage. Inside, the heating system on the floor, pre-made concrete hearth, gorgeous hammer beams. All the pegs have been cut, they're being stained now. This is below the Great Hall. I'm not sure what room this would be. There's a nice pool table in there. Some nice chandeliers. Again, stone, concrete, stone. So 2 foot thick walls. So you can see nice, big, deep sills. Into the Great Hall. Getting its finishes. All right, now we'll take a quick look at the 2 outbuildings here. So the garage was started early, and we staged a lot of material in there. And then this beautiful structure was a barn, or no, a little house, a small log cabin from Tennessee that was salvaged. And I think by the owner's calculations, these poplar timbers were probably growing from before the Revolution. I think that was his estimate. So it's on a concrete base. Then there's some framing some dimensional 2x framing that we had to build a base for this thing to sit on. And then the structure came in and was assembled, and then the rest we extended it beyond the footprint of the original, and then some sheathing up top, rafters, and this is all our tar paper, or the weather guard, the peel and stick weather guard. Let's get a closer look. Here we are. This was modeled after a famous barn in England, actually. Beautiful copper gutters here, gorgeous. So again, 2 foot thick walls, heavy duty surrounds here. These are probably 8 by 8, so that was a chore putting those in. Little parapet wall. Finishing the beautiful roof. These were these were wheels. I don't know if we'll get a closer look at it, but it was a wheel used in in a mill building. How they would often have circular wheels overhead, like for pulleys moving things. So nice architectural item there. This is the garage ceiling. It's a heck of a garage ceiling. A lot of work we did in here, so we would spent an entire winter in scaffolding just going up and down. So it was sanding the entire frame, staining the entire frame, and then getting in here and painting these bays, and then putting half timbering in there as well. So a lot of work to finish that garage ceiling. So here you can see the 2-foot thick walls. So this would be mounted, this pressure treated threshold would be mounted first. Again, we would get it nice and level and square, and we would put braces inside if need be, and then the stonemasons would work to that. These are the utility shelves in the back of the garage. So nice heavy duty angle brackets supporting, these were oak shelves. I think they were about 2 feet deep, and then they'd have 8 inches of rock back here encompassing or covering up these angle brackets. So this again, I think there are 6 of these shelves in the garage on the back wall. It probably took 2 weeks to put these in. So here you could see with the hammer drill constantly hitting rebar in these concrete walls and making it really difficult to mount these things. It was really, really difficult. So many tools, and just the 2 of us fighting with it for a long time. Big chore. And then we put up this piece to hold them temporarily. And now into the woodworking shop. So that's the gorgeous poplar. Here getting finished with kind of a traditional looking wattle and daub, it would be called. So here you could kind of see, this is chicken wire with some light, like 8 penny nails holding it in place with insulation. So this chinking, you would call it, would happen on both sides of this, and so it would be chinking, wire mesh, insulation, wire mesh on the other side, chinking on the other side. Beautiful roof up there. That's a terracotta. And finally, this is one frame that I did get to cut with this gentleman who was a great woodworker. And this is by far the most sophisticated carpentry I've ever done. It's this piece was pretty easy. Getting around to meet a square, that was easy enough. But we'll go jump into the last one here, and you can see where we have rounds meeting rounds. This was very sophisticated and took a lot of time to get these beams to tie into these columns. So we cut that frame, then we put this square timber roof up on it, and this would be in the back of the woodshed. Okay, so it took a while, but there's a lot to look at. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for your time.